So what you're doing now, there's nothing in writing as a guidepost.
Well, sir, you certainly know that there are reform bills here in the House side and in the Senate side of how to address the failures of FEMA from the past.
No, but you're the
Those will be
secretary.
considered with the FEMA Review Council recommendations.
No, you're the secretary, and you say you're doing all these things. And I'm just asking you, do you have a written plan for what you're doing?
There's no formalized final plan for how this goes forward.
This may look like a routine oversight hearing, but it's actually a stress test of how federal power is exercised during national emergencies. What's really being tested here is whether sweeping structural changes can move forward without a written framework or clear accountability. This raises broader questions about preparedness, federal responsibility, and the limits of executive discretion. In this video, we'll break down what happens when disaster policy is reshaped first and defined later.
My commitment to be inside my 5 minutes, I will now yield to the ranking member for his 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. The Department of Homeland Security has been the top target on the Donald Trump's revenge tour, and you, Madam Secretary, are the chief accomplice. The Trump administration is hell-bent on destroying the Department of Homeland Security, built through bipartisan collaboration over the past 2 decades and evading any accountability for its actions. Let's start with what the administration is doing to FEMA. Madam Secretary, you said that you want to get rid of FEMA, and the administration plan is to shirk its disaster response obligation and leave state and local governments to fend for themselves. Emergency managers across the country are sounding the alarm about the limited ability to respond when disasters strike, but their calls are falling on deaf ears from the White House. What is the administration's plan to respond to catastrophic disasters beyond shifting responsibilities to states and local communities who are already telling you they don't have the ability to respond?
Well, Congressman, President Trump has been very clear that he believes that FEMA should be eliminated as it exists today. He believes there's dramatic reforms that need to happen to the agency in order for it to truly serve people in a time of crisis. He wants to empower states and local governments to respond to their people. The federal government would be there for resources, support, much like block grants, but that we need to empower those locally to respond to their people because they know what they need. That is something that every state is at a different position today to respond, but he wants to give them the opportunity to build up the infrastructure to respond to their emergency.
Madam Secretary, do you have this plan in writing?
The White House is coming forward with the participation of the FEMA Review Council, which we have members from many states that are sitting on that will be making recommendations.
So what you're doing now, there's nothing in writing as a guidepost.
Well, sir, you certainly know that there are reform bills here in the House side and in the Senate side of how to address the failures of FEMA from the past.
No, but you're the
Those will be
secretary.
considered with the FEMA Review Council recommendations.
No, you're the secretary, and you say you're doing all these things. And I'm just asking you, do you have a written plan for what you're doing?
There's no formalized final plan for how this goes forward because the input of Congress is critically important. As you know, there are statutory requirements of the agency.
Well, I'm glad you recognize,
Madam
Secretary, I'm glad you recognize the statutory requirements. Washington State, Mississippi, and a couple other states already have requests in to you or to the President for disaster declaration, and it's taken an inordinate amount of time, more than normal. I just want to know, is that inordinate amount of time is based on some plan that you have knowledge of? But if it's not in writing, I understand. So you talked about the rule of law. Are you telling the committee that due process for anybody that's picked up in this country should not be followed?
Congressman, we have utilized due process as it is laid out in the tools that Congress has given us. We have followed the tools and the processes to which Congress has given us to give due process to people appropriately as it is due.
So your testimony to this committee under oath is that everybody that ICE has picked up in this country has been given every opportunity as Section 5 under the Constitution provides.
Correct. I believe everybody has gotten due process and every person has been treated appropriately according to the civil or the criminal action to which they were encountering individuals and brought into our detainment and then also removed from this country.
So your answer is yes.
The tools that you have given us as this
I'm
body
talking about the Constitution of the United States. I'm not talking about tools. The Constitution is clear.
Correct. And
And your testimony under oath to this committee is that everybody that ICE has picked up and any other agency of DHS has conformed to those statutes.
for example, Congressman,
No,
expedited
yes or no?
removal.
No, I don't need an
Expedited
example.
removal is one of the
Madam
tools
Secretary,
that you have
I
given
got
us to
4
utilize
seconds.
as due process.
I just need a yes or no.
Sir, that is the due process tool that you have given us to utilize that has been appropriately.
So obviously,
Gentleman's time has expired. I now
I have a
recognize-
unanimous consent request, Chairman.
I'm sorry?
I have a unanimous consent request.
What we just witnessed in that exchange was not merely a disagreement over policy. It was a moment where the foundations of authority were tested calmly, methodically, and under oath. As Bennie Thompson pressed Kristi Noem, the room narrowed its focus to a single question that refused to disappear. Where is the plan and where is the accountability? When asked whether there was anything in writing guiding the dismantling or reshaping of FEMA, the answer drifted. When pressed again, it dissolved into process, into future councils, into abstract reform. And when Thompson pivoted to due process, the most basic promise of constitutional governance, the answers became careful, qualified, and ultimately evasive. This is where the hearing stopped being routine, because due process is not a slogan. It is not a tool to be invoked when convenient and redefined when uncomfortable. It is a constitutional guarantee that exists precisely to restrain power when power believes it is justified. Thompson understood that. That's why he refused to accept generalities. That's why he demanded clarity, a simple yes or no. And that clarity never came. Instead, what emerged was a revealing pattern. When asked about FEMA, there was no written framework, no finalized plan, just intentions, discussions, and future input. Yet states were already waiting. Requests were already delayed. Responsibilities were already shifting. Action was happening without a map, and consequences were unfolding without explanation. That matters because FEMA is not an abstract agency. It represents the federal promise that when crisis strikes, the response will not depend on geography, politics, or timing. Remove that certainty and you replace a national standard with uncertainty. You turn coordination into improvisation. Then came the sharper turn. When Thompson asked whether everyone taken into custody had been afforded due process under the Constitution, the answer was confident in tone, but fragile in substance. The response leaned heavily on tools, expedited procedures authorized by Congress, rather than the Constitution itself. And that distinction is critical because tools can be adjusted, tools can be expanded, tools can be interpreted. The Constitution cannot. Thompson didn't let that slide. He stripped the question down to its core. Are constitutional standards being met without exception? Not administratively, not procedurally, constitutionally. The refusal to answer plainly revealed more than any admission could have. What this exchange exposes is a broader tension shaping American governance right now. Power is moving faster than oversight. Decisions are being executed before frameworks are finalized. Authority is being exercised with confidence, but without the transparency that earns public trust. And when pressed, the answers don't resolve the tension. They redirect it. This is how institutional accountability erodes, not in dramatic collapse, but in incremental distance. Distance between promises and paperwork, between constitutional language and operational reality, between what officials are willing to say and what they are willing to put in writing. Bennie Thompson's persistence wasn't about scoring political points. It was about forcing the record to reflect reality. Because hearings like this don't just inform lawmakers, they create a historical account. A moment frozen in time where officials either anchor their actions in law or reveal how loosely that law is being held. Leadership is tested not when questions are easy, but when they are precise. Power is revealed not in speeches, but in answers given under oath. And systems are judged not by intent, but by structure, clarity, and restraint. What we saw here was a warning sign. A reminder that even in established institutions, accountability must be actively defended, that constitutional guarantees do not enforce themselves. and that when plans exist only in conversation, the public bears the risk. This is why hearings matter. This is why questions must be repeated. And this is why silence, hesitation, and deflection are never neutral. They tell a story of their own. As citizens, the responsibility doesn't end when the gavel falls. It begins with paying attention, with demanding clarity, with refusing to accept vague assurances in place of written commitments and constitutional certainty. Because once due process becomes negotiable, nothing else remains secure. If you believe transparency matters, if you believe accountability matters, if you believe the Constitution is not optional, then stay informed, stay engaged, and support the work that brings these moments into the light. Subscribe to Liberty Report USA.